Here's a question most analysts avoid. Why can Netflix dominate 190 countries but fail completely in the world's largest streaming market? Think about that for a second. A platform worth over $250 billion with global hits watched from Brazil to South Korea can't meaningfully enter China, a market with more than 1.4 billion people and hundreds of millions of smartphone viewers. Most people assume it's simple censorship. But that's the lazy explanation. The real story is far more strategic and, frankly, far more unsettling. But here's what mainstream coverage gets wrong. The failure of Netflix in China isn't just about politics, and it isn't about culture either. It's about systems. 3 of them, to be precise. 3 strategic systems that Chinese tech companies built quietly over the last 15 years. Systems that turned streaming from a simple entertainment product into something much bigger. A digital ecosystem, a data machine, and a government-aligned platform. And if you want to understand why Netflix struggles while iQiyi built an audience of more than 500 million registered users, you need to understand those systems. Because this isn't really a story about movies or TV shows, it's a story about power. Digital power, regulatory power, and economic power working together. Let me break this down with a simple framework. The 3 gates of the Chinese internet. Gate number 1 is regulatory alignment. Gate number 2 is ecosystem integration. And gate number 3 is audience economics. Most Western companies only think about the first gate, censorship rules and licensing approvals. But that's only the surface layer. The deeper gates are where the real competitive advantage is built. System number 1, regulatory alignment, is the one outsiders obsess over. And yes, it matters. China approved exactly 38 foreign TV series for limited online distribution in 2022. 38, not 300, not even 100, 38. But here's what nobody tells you. Local platforms don't just survive inside those rules, they help design the environment around them. I remember talking to a media executive in Shenzhen a few years ago who explained this to me bluntly. He said the biggest misunderstanding foreigners have about Chinese tech is assuming regulation is only a barrier. In reality, it can also be a moat. Platforms like iQiyi work closely with regulators on licensing structures, domestic production quotas, and content review pipelines. That relationship creates predictability that outsiders simply don't have. Let me show you the numbers that matter. In 2023, China's online video market generated roughly $38.6 billion in revenue. But more than 80% of that revenue flowed through just 3 domestic platforms, iQiyi, Tencent Video, and Youku. Foreign companies weren't just small players. They were structurally absent. And here's the paradox. The rules that seem restrictive from the outside actually stabilize the domestic market on the inside. When content approvals, data regulations, and distribution licenses are tightly controlled, scale becomes incredibly valuable. And local companies that already understand the system can move faster than any outsider trying to decode it. When I was in Beijing last year, a producer told me something fascinating. A single hit Chinese drama on iQiyi can generate over 1.2 billion cumulative views across episodes, not million, billion. That scale attracts advertisers, investors, and state-backed production funding all at once. So while Netflix arrives with a global catalog, iQiyi arrives with something much more powerful, structural advantage. The company isn't just distributing shows, it's embedded inside the rules, the funding pipelines, and the data flows of China's digital economy. Here's what matters. Once a platform is integrated that deeply, competition stops being about content libraries. It becomes about ecosystems. And that's where the second gate begins. Because streaming in China isn't just an app you open at night to watch a show. It's tied to e-commerce, gaming, social media, and payment systems in ways most Western viewers never see. Stay with me, because the ecosystem strategy behind iQiyi is the real reason Netflix keeps hitting a wall in China. And once you see how it works, the entire global streaming battle looks completely different. And the numbers behind that system are even more shocking than most analysts realize today online. So here's the second force at work, and this one operates completely differently from the regulatory story most people focus on. The second gate is ecosystem integration. And if you're trying to understand why Netflix can't gain traction in China, this is where the analysis usually breaks down. Let me ask you something. What if streaming wasn't just a streaming service? What if it was part of a digital web connecting e-commerce, social media, gaming, advertising, and payments all at once? That's the system Chinese platforms built. Most people think Netflix is competing against iQiyi. But here's what's really happening. Netflix is competing against the entire Chinese internet. iQiyi isn't just a standalone company. It's majority owned by Baidu, China's search giant. That means the streaming platform sits inside one of the country's largest data and advertising ecosystems. When users search for actors, movies, or trending shows, Baidu's algorithms can push traffic directly toward iQiyi. Here's what nobody tells you about that structure. Discovery becomes automatic. Let me show you the numbers that matter. Baidu processes roughly 3.3 billion searches per day across its services. Even if a tiny fraction of those searches convert into streaming clicks, that's a massive built-in funnel of viewers. Netflix doesn't have that advantage, and it gets even deeper. iQiyi integrates with Chinese super apps like WeChat and Alipay, meaning users can share clips, purchase subscriptions, and even buy merchandise tied to shows without leaving the ecosystem. Streaming becomes just one node in a much larger economic network. This is what I call the platform gravity effect. Once a company sits inside multiple digital services, users rarely leave that orbit. When I spoke with a product manager who previously worked on Chinese video apps, he explained it with a simple example. If a viewer finishes watching a historical drama on iQiyi, the platform might recommend a related mobile game, a live stream fan event, or even e-commerce merchandise tied to the show. Suddenly, the viewer isn't just watching content. They're participating in a monetized fan ecosystem. Netflix, by contrast, operates mostly as a closed entertainment environment. Watch a show, the algorithm recommends another show. That's it. Now, here's where the contrast becomes really striking. iQiyi reported more than 100 million paying subscribers at its peak, but its total user base across free and paid tiers exceeded 500 million registered accounts. That free tier matters enormously because advertising, microtransactions, and brand partnerships become additional revenue streams layered on top of subscriptions. Western streaming platforms built their model around one main lever: subscription revenue. Chinese platforms built multi-layered monetization systems. Stay with me, because this is where things start to connect to a much bigger economic story. A senior media economist once told me something off the record that stuck with me. He said Western analysts keep comparing Netflix to Chinese streaming platforms using the wrong framework. They compare subscriber counts and content budgets. But that's like comparing a smartphone to an entire telecom network. Here's what matters. iQiyi's ecosystem allows it to monetize the same user across multiple industries simultaneously. Advertising, games, e-commerce partnerships, fan events, digital tipping, even interactive shows where viewers pay to unlock alternate storylines. Let me show you a concrete example. One Chinese fantasy drama released on iQiyi generated revenue not only from streaming ads, but also from branded clothing sales, mobile game partnerships, and paid behind-the-scenes fan content. Total ecosystem revenue tied to that single series reportedly exceeded $420 million. Think about that for a moment. The show itself was only part of the business model. This connects to something even bigger, and I'll show you in a minute. Because when platforms become ecosystem hubs rather than simple streaming services, they gain a massive strategic advantage They collect more data, they control more distribution channels, and they lock users into longer digital relationships. Netflix can spend billions producing world-class content. But if that content exists outside the broader digital ecosystem Chinese consumers live inside every day, its reach becomes limited before it even begins. But here's the part that should surprise you. Even ecosystem power isn't the most important advantage Chinese platforms have, because the third system, the one almost nobody in Western media discusses, is the real engine behind those 500 million users. And once you see the economics behind that system, you'll understand why the global streaming war isn't just about entertainment anymore. It's about a completely different model of digital capitalism. So here's the third force at work, and this is the one most Western analysts completely miss. We've talked about regulatory alignment, we've talked about ecosystem integration, but the third gate, the one that truly explains how iQiyi reached more than 500 million users, is audience economics. Let me ask you a simple question. What if the biggest advantage in streaming wasn't content or technology, but price? Most people assume streaming economics work the same everywhere. You charge a monthly subscription, build a content library, and grow subscribers. That's the Netflix model. But here's what mainstream coverage gets wrong. China never fully adopted that model. Instead, Chinese platforms built a hybrid system combining subscriptions, advertising, microtransactions, and tiered access. Here's what nobody tells you. The average iQiyi VIP membership costs roughly 25 yuan per month. That's about $350. Compare that to Netflix's global standard plan, which in many markets sits around $15 per month. This is the iQiyi paradox. Lower prices, but bigger scale. And when scale reaches hundreds of millions of users, the economics start to look very different. Let me show you the numbers that matter. China's internet population reached approximately 1.09 billion users in 2023. Even if only half of them watch long-form video content regularly, that's still a potential audience larger than the entire population of the United States and Europe combined. So Chinese platforms didn't build their business around maximizing subscription price. They built it around maximizing participation. Free users watch ads. Fans pay for early access to episodes. Hardcore viewers buy premium tiers. And superfans spend money on digital perks, live stream interactions, and fan communities. Suddenly, a single viewer can generate revenue across multiple channels. When I spoke with a digital strategist who worked on streaming platforms in Shanghai, he explained something fascinating. He said the goal wasn't just to convert viewers into subscribers. The goal was to convert viewers into participants. Participation means data. Participation means engagement. Participation means monetization beyond subscriptions. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Western streaming industry optimized for revenue per user. China's platforms optimized for economic activity per user. Those are very different strategies. Let me give you an example that illustrates the scale of this system. Chinese drama series often release new episodes multiple times per week, sometimes even daily. But here's the twist. Free users might have to wait several days to watch the newest episode. Paying members get early access, and the most dedicated fans, they can pay a small additional fee to unlock the entire season immediately. Think about what that does to viewer psychology. Scarcity drives urgency, urgency drives spending, and suddenly millions of viewers are making small digital purchases that add up across massive audiences. Here's what matters. Those microtransactions don't look impressive individually. $8 here, $2 there. But across tens of millions of fans, the revenue becomes enormous. Now connect that to China's mobile payment infrastructure. Platforms integrate directly with services like Alipay and WeChat Pay, meaning transactions take seconds. No friction, no credit card forms. Just tap and pay. When I was speaking with a content producer who worked on online dramas, he told me something that stuck with me. He said a successful show in China isn't just measured by ratings. It's measured by how many economic layers it activates. Advertising revenue, membership upgrades, fan merchandise, digital tipping, game partnerships, brand placements. That's why a hit series can generate hundreds of millions of dollars across the ecosystem. But here's the part that should make you stop and think. This system doesn't just create profitable shows. It creates loyal communities around platforms. And once users are economically and socially invested in that ecosystem, switching platforms becomes unlikely. This is the uncomfortable truth most global streaming companies don't want to admit. Netflix didn't just fail to enter China because of censorship. It failed because the entire streaming economy in China evolved into something fundamentally different, a hybrid entertainment marketplace rather than a simple subscription service. And that raises a much bigger question. If the Chinese model continues scaling across Asia, Africa, and emerging markets, could the global streaming industry eventually shift away from the Netflix model entirely? Because the final piece of this story isn't about China anymore. It's about where the future of digital entertainment is heading next. So let's complete the picture. We've talked about regulatory alignment, ecosystem integration, and audience economics. But to really understand why Netflix can't crack China while iQiyi built an audience of over 500 million users, we need to pull these three forces together. Because individually, each system is powerful. But when they operate together, they create something far more difficult to compete against. Let me ask you something. What happens when regulation protects domestic platforms, ecosystems feed them traffic, and economic models maximize participation instead of subscriptions? You get what I call the digital fortress model. And this is where most Western analysis completely misses the real story. Here's what matters. The digital fortress model creates a self-reinforcing loop. Regulations shape the market structure. Ecosystems drive massive user flows. And flexible monetization models turn those users into long-term economic participants. Once that loop starts working, new entrants face almost impossible barriers. Let me show you what this actually means with numbers. China's online video audience exceeded 1.04 billion viewers in 2023. That's not a niche market. That's essentially the entire internet population of a continent. And the top three domestic platforms, iQiyi, Tencent Video, and Youku, collectively dominate the majority of that traffic. That concentration means content producers, advertisers, and investors naturally flow toward those platforms. When I talked to a senior digital media analyst in Hong Kong, he explained it in a way that stuck with me. He said entering China's streaming market today is like trying to launch a new social network in a world already dominated by Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube combined. Technically possible, practically brutal. Here's what mainstream coverage gets wrong. Netflix didn't simply fail to enter China, it ran into a completely different digital architecture. And this connects to something even bigger. Because once you see how the digital fortress model works in China, you start noticing versions of it appearing in other regions. India is experimenting with hybrid streaming economics. Southeast Asia is building ecosystem-based platforms tied to super apps. Even parts of the Middle East are testing localized digital entertainment ecosystems. So the real question isn't whether Netflix will eventually enter China. The real question is whether the global streaming model will start shifting toward China's system instead. Let me give you three possible futures. Scenario 1, the global Netflix model survives. In this world, premium subscription platforms continue dominating Western markets. High-budget global content remains the primary driver of growth. Streaming becomes similar to Hollywood distribution, globalized and centralized. Scenario 2, the hybrid platform era. This is where things get interesting. Platforms combine subscriptions, advertising, live streaming, gaming, and e-commerce into unified ecosystems. Entertainment becomes part of a broader digital economy rather than a standalone service. Sound familiar? That's essentially the system China already built. Scenario 3, the fragmented streaming world. In this future, regional platforms dominate their own markets with localized economic models and regulatory frameworks. Instead of one global streaming giant, you get multiple regional ecosystems competing for influence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Right now, the world looks like it's moving closer to scenario 2 or 3 than scenario 1. Because digital platforms increasingly succeed when they're embedded in local ecosystems, not when they're operating as standalone global services. This is the Netflix paradox. The company that revolutionized global streaming might be facing limits in a world where digital economies are becoming more regional, more integrated, and more politically structured. But here's the part I'm most curious about. If China built a streaming platform with 500 million users by combining regulation, ecosystems, and hybrid economics, what happens when that model spreads globally? Could the next generation of entertainment platforms look less like Netflix and more like digital super ecosystems? That's the question most analysts aren't asking yet. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button so more people see it. And if you want deeper analysis on the power shifts shaping global tech and economics, make sure you subscribe. But I'm curious about your perspective. Do you think the future of streaming belongs to global platforms like Netflix or regional digital ecosystems like iQiyi? Let me know in the comments.